Okay, here we go. Zok Tehillim Gemara. We are on the bottom of Daf Yud Daled on the base, and we are up to the Gemara that discussed whether or not there is a Gzera Shava of Schir. It says by Moicher Atzmoi in Vayikra in Bahar. It says Kiyamach Achicha Benimkar, and then it says Keschir V'Soishav Yimcha. And then the next, and then it says by Machru Bezdin, which would be in Devarim. It says Kimishnis Char Schira V'Chra Sheishonim, which is also the parsha of Hanukkah. It says Schir there as well, and we learn that just like when Machru Bezdin, you could be paid to him. You could be koinen with kesef. So too by Mocher Atzmoi it's bekesef. So we had actually two pshatim on how you know that when someone sells himself, Nevid Ivri sells himself to another yid, how do we know that there's kinyan kesef? You either learn it up from Machru Bezdin because it says schir from Gzera Shava, and if we don't have Machru Bezdin, if you don't hold the Gzera Shava, the Gemara said that in Bahar, right after the parsha of discussing the person selling himself as an Nevid Ivri, it discusses the chisasig yad ger toishav when someone sells himself to a guy, and we learn from the v'chisas, if it's connecting it to the previous Inyan, we learn that just like when one sells themselves to a guy, it's b'kinyan kesef. So too, if one sells himself to a yid, it's also b'kinyan kesef. So the Gemara told us that whether or not you darshan schir will also dictate whether or not you learn kinyan kesef by an Nevid who says himself from Machru Bezdin. That's what you would use if you have schir. If you don't have schir, then you would use v'chisasig yad ger toishav. So now the Gemara went off on a tangent, trying to see, is there a Tana that we could find that actually will reject the Gzera Shava of schir? I just want to point out, right now, when the Gemara says schir, Rashi says very clearly, by Moicher Atzmoi, which is in Bahar, it says Chiyamach Achicha V'Nimkar, and it says there Keschir V'Soishav Yimach. You shouldn't do with him Kavodas Eved, and by Machru Bezdin, which is a parsha in Devarim, that's where it says Kimishnes Charsach, Devarim Tesvav. Okay, I believe that's in Re'eh. So let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara wanted to say that we had a machloikis tanoim if all of the halachas that apply by Machru Bezdin, and the Gemara tells us what those are. A is that Moicher Atzmoi is nimker even liyeser al sheish. It's not after 6 years. Someone could stipulate in his contract that he's selling himself for longer than 6 years. There was the distinction where the nirtza, which is halacha that's only told to us by Mechur Bezdin, whether that applies to Mocher Atzmoi. There's a question of the Hanukkah. Hanukkah is also taught to us in the Torah by Mechur Bezdin. Does that apply to Mocher Atzmoi? And then there was the shaila of if the Rabbi Moshe Shechaknainis, that we know applies by Mechur Bezdin. Does it also apply by Mocher Atzmoi? We have a machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer says that whatever applies to Machru Bezdin equally applies to Mocher Atzmoi, while the Tanakhama said not. So the Gemara said, my last v'hokamifically, and we are approximately 15 lines from the bottom. My last v'hokamifically, the first two words on the line are v'hokamifically. The Tanakhama loyal of schir. The Tanakhama does not learn that Gzera Shava, and therefore we don't automatically say that whatever halachos we know by Machru Bezdin automatically apply to Mocher Atzmoi. Rabbi Eliezer Yalav schir, and therefore he says that they mirror each other in all their halachos. No, you don't have a raya from here. You have not yet discovered that Hana who rejects the Gzera Shava of schir, because it's possible that everybody does hold of schir, and therefore you could learn the halacha that Mocher Atzmoi can do it with kinyan kesef. But all of these cases, Hanukkah, Moshel Shefchaknainis, if you could suffer more than 6 years, and if it has the principle of nirtza, in each particular instance, there's a special miyut to tell us that these halachas only apply to machur bezdin and they don't apply to mocher atzma. My time at the Tanakama, the Amar mocher atzma nimker l'sheish v'yeser al sheish. So now the Gemara is going to go through each of these halachas one by one to show that this specifically, the Torah was megala, that you should not compare it to machur bezdin. So what is it for the Tanakama? The Amar mocher atzma nimker l'sheish v'yeser al sheish. The Tanakama holds that there's no limit of 6 years when one sells themselves as an Eved Ivri. Zok Gemara, Mid Rachmana Gaber Mechur Bezdin. By Mechur Bezdin, the Torah says, Vavatcha Sheishanim. This Eved, Dafka, this Eved will work 6 years only. Zev Eloi Moicher Atzma. So even though you have Exer Shava, we have a special word in the Pasuk to tell us that Lagabi this halacha, there's a distinction between Mocher Atzma and Mechur Bezdin. What about the Tana who doesn't learn that distinction? He learns, which is Rabbi Lazar, the Eved only works for you, but the Eved who sells himself, the Eved who's sold by Bezdin, does not work for a Yeresh. What does it mean that an Eved doesn't work for a Yeresh? So Rashi says, the Einoi Oved lo yesabas v'lo yesa'ach im ein loy ben. Aval oivru is a ben kid l'kaman. That we said that machru bezdin doesn't work for a Yerush if his adon dies. That means if it's not his son will yarshin his father's Eved Ivri. But other Yerushim, if there's no sons, they will not yarshin an Eved Ivri. How does the Tanakama know this halacha? There's another pasuk in the sugya which is avatra, as Rashi tells us, ki mishne shchar schachir avatra. The idich. So what is Rabbi Lazar going to do? Put that extra of avatra. That's just to tell you, don't feel bad that you're giving hanaka. Don't feel bad that it's costing you so much. Ki mishne shchar schachir avatra, because this fellow worked so hard for you for the last 6 years. You shouldn't feel bad that you're giving him hanaka. You're still getting a pretty good deal because he delivered very well throughout the period of time that he was working for you. So now let's go on to the next halacha. My time in the Tanakama, the Amr Moicher Atzmai Eine Nirtza. What is as far as the Tanakama who holds that there's no din Nirtza by a Moicher Atzmai? Dr. Gemara, Midemiyat Rachmana Gava Machru Bezdin. By Machru Bezdin, it says Varotza Adoinov es Oznoi. Dafke, his ear, meaning the ear of somebody who is machru bezdin. Barata denova says noi b'martzeya oznoi shaloi v'loi oznoi shal mocher atzma. Again, you have a special miyut, the extra word oznoi, to tell us that this halacha applies exclusively to machru bezdin, but not to mocher atzma. And now we can turn on to Tezvavim and Aleph, which is today's daf. Zok the Heilige Gemara. What is Rabbi Eliezer going to use Oznoi for? Because he's not Mimayit. He says that they do have the same halacha. Ahil Gzera Shava Udas. Oznoi is to give us Gzera Shava. How do we know that when the evidence is nirtza, how do you know they use his right ear? Maybe they use his left ear. We know it from Gzera Shava. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Minayin l'ritzia sheib oizen yamanos. How do we know that the ritzia is done in the Eved's right ear? It says in the parasha of Mitzorah Oizen. And interesting, in the parasha of Mitzorah, a Mitzorah, when he discharges his Toma, has 2 options of what type of karbanos to bring. If it's a wealthy Mitzorah, he brings behemoths. If it's a poor Mitzorah, he brings oifots. The Torah goes through the entire process, if he's an Ashir, how you process the behemoths. And it says that the blood of the Chatos is put on the ear of the Mitzorah. And then when the Torah discusses Mitzorah Dal, who's bringing oifots, all the Torah really needed to say is you do the same process with the oifots. Yet the Torah repeats the whole Seder all over again, including that the blood is put on oizen hayavonis. So that second set of oizen is all extra. Just like by the Mitzorah, we know it's the right ear. Av kan yamin. So too, when we're discussing the nirtza, we're referring to the right ear. The idich, the Tana who holds that we know we need the oznoi for a miyut to tell us that this doesn't apply to mocher atzmai. How do I know this k'ser shava? Im kein lemikra oizen, my oznoi. The dik is from oznoi. The k'ser shava you could have learned just with the word oizen. Oznoi means dafka his ear, the ear of someone who was machur bezin, not the ear of somebody who sold himself. Be'edich, oznoi v'loi oznoi. To tell us that this halacha of nirtza only applies to an Eved Ivri. A normal of Rhea who says, I want to continue working, she doesn't have that parsha of nirtza. The idach nafkalei v'im yoimer ha'eved. The whole parsha of nirtza was introduced by the Torah with v'im omar yoimer ha'eved. If the Eved says, so you see, this is something that applies exclusively to a Eved. Ha'eved v'omar. The idach. You know why it says Eved? It's actually Yomer Keshu Eved. If an Eved who's nirtza, or Eved likes it by his other, if he waits for the 6 years to expire, and only after the 6 year expires, he says, I want to stay on, then it's too late. He will not become an Eved nirtza. He only becomes an Eved nirtza if he makes this proclamation that I want to stay on before his 6 years expire. The other Mandamar who needs it to tell us that it's Eved Amma, how will you know it has to be Kishu Eved? May Eved ha Eved nafka. It doesn't say Yomer Amar Yomer Eved. It says Yomer ha Eved. It's the extra heavy that tells us that Dafka while he's still within his 6 years. The Idrich Eved ha Eved Loitar, which finally to even the score, the other Mandamar holds that there is no extra limit to be extracted because of the extra hey. That's how the Torah, that's how the Torah speaks. You cannot extract any extra information from that. So that explains the machlokes legabi whether moicher satzmai could be nirtza. Let's get on to the third halacha, where there's a machlokes if it applies to mocher atzmai as well. My time in the Tanakama, the Omar moicher atzmai ein manikma. What is this for the Tanakama who holds that someone who sells himself is not entitled to anokah, he does not get severance? Dr. Gemara once again, miyut rachmana gabe machur bezin. When the Torah by Machur Bezin introduces this chiyuv of Hanukkah, the Torah says Hanik loy. Who should you give Hanukkah to? Loy, after this Eved that was sold by Bezdin, the loy lemoicher, but not to an Eved that sold himself. The idich. So what will the Rabbi Eliezer hold, who says that it applies equally to a moicher atzmai as well? The idich. How boy loy. Loy v'loy liyarshav. You know who has a chiyuv? You know who the Odin has to give Hanaka to? The Odin has to give Hanaka to his Eved Ivri. What if upon leaving his Avdus, the Eved Ivri's time expired, and then he died before the Odin had a chance to pay the severance? There, the Odin does not have to pay the severance to the Yorshim of the Eved. He's potter. The chiv is only to give the Hanukkah to the Eved himself. Frekt Gemara, that's not a logical statement. Yarshav, amai loy. Why, if this was Hanukkah that the Eved was entitled to, and the Eved passed away, why should his Yarshim not be entitled to that benefit? Schir kayirachma. We consider an Eved a schir. Mishnah schar sachir. Called him an employee. Maschir pula soili yarshav. Just like any worker, if he died before he received his paycheck, his Yorshim will get his paycheck. Af hai pula soili yarshav. So too, this Evet, the Hanukkah is connected his pay. So if he gets Hanukkah, why would you say that the Yorshim are not entitled to this? So you cannot say loy v'loy liyarshav, because that is not a logical thing to say. Ela loy. Here's a huge chiddush. Normally, if someone owes you money and he's not paying, you can get his wages garnished. Why can you get his wages garnished? Because of Shibud Rab Nosson. We know if Reuven owes Shimon money and Shimon owes Levi money, Levi can go and collect directly from Reuven. Why? Because of Shibud Rab Nosson. Rab Nosson holds that I can go after the loiva of my loiva to collect from directly. So you might think if an Eved, if he owes money, and he's entitled to a knock that someone, so the person who he owes money to can go to his other and say, no, don't give him his severance. Give me the severance directly because I want to garnish those wages. Kamashlan that Hanaka goes only to the Eved himself. It would be exempt from, it will be protected from being garnished on behalf of a creditor. How do you know that? Why would you need a pasuk to tell us that? Midasvirlon ba'alma, since this Tana generally holds kirab nosan, like Rab Nosan, the Tanya Amar Rab Nosan. Minayin l'noisha b'chaveri mona, b'chaveri b'chaveri. If Eos be on BOC, minayin shemaytziin mizavanois l'zeh. If Aos B and BOC, do you have AOC? You have AOC. Since he holds normally like Shibudi Rab Nosan, therefore here we need a pause to tell you that Hanaka is exempt, is protected from Shibudi Rab Nosan. And the Mandomer who does not have this loy extra, because he's using loy to tell us that Mochar Atzmai does not get Hanaka. How will he know that it's exempt from Shehudi Rab Nosan? Ve'idich ba'alma nami lo svir lo Rab Nosan. Rabbi Lezer in our Mishnah, who learns that a moicher atzmai receives Hanaka, he uses loy to tell us that it's not. Rabbi Lezer uses loy to tell us that it's not susceptible to garnished wages to Shehudi Rab Nosan. But the Tanakama, who needs loy to tell you loy and not someone who sells himself, he has no limud to tell us that Hanaka is exempt from a Balchoiv. Zok to Gemara, he doesn't need it because the Rabbanan in our Mishnah will argue. The Rabbanan in our Mishnah will argue with Rab Nosan. So therefore, never are my wages subject to seizure, subject to being garnished. My time in the Tanakama. The Amar Moicher Atzmai in Rabbi Moshe l'Shifchak times. This is the fourth of the four halachas when we have a machlokes. It applies to Moicher Atzmai. The Tanakama holds that it doesn't apply. The halacha of the Eved Ivri marrying a Shifchak Tainis, it does not apply to Moicher Atzmai. Where do you know it from? So tomorrow minut rachmana gava merchura best. It says in Parashas Mishpatim, Imadeinov yitain lui isha. After this Eved that was sold by the Bezdin. Loy veloy lemoicher atzmai. V'hidich and Rabbi Eliezer who holds that it does apply to moicher atzmai. V'hidich loy bal karchai, that the Adon doesn't ask the Eved, do you want to be with a Shivcha Knainis? He can force the Eved Ivri to be with a Shivcha Knainis so that they will produce for him more avodim. V'hidich, you know how we know that the Adon can force the Eved Ivri to be with a Shivcha Knainis? The Torah tells us you must give your Eved Hanaka in Parshas Re'eh. You know why? Because Mishnas Char Socher, he works for you double. What does it mean that the Eved works for you double? Tanya we learned, Ki Mishnas Char Socher Avodcha. Fragt the Gemara, Schir Eino Eved El B'yoyim. A Schir only works by day. Yet an Eved Ivri is Eved Bein B'yoyim Uvein B'layim. To Mishnas Char Socher, he works double. He works two shifts. How does it mean that? What do you mean he works two shifts? How could you say he works two shifts? Are you telling me that the Eved Ivri works 24 hours a day? That's impossible. Fakert, if anything, an Eved Ivri should work less than a normal employee, not more, because you need to treat the Eved better than yourself. And we learned if you only have enough for one, either you or the Eved gets it. If you only have one pillow, the Eved gets it. If you only have enough food for one person, the Eved gets it. So such a person, you're going to say, has to work double shifts? It doesn't make sense. You know what it means that an Eved Ivri has to work a double shift? It means he has to work at night. What type of work is he doing at night? He has to. It's called a labor of love. He has to work at night because he has to be with a shivcha knainis, and he's producing offspring on behalf of his other. So you see that he could force his Eved to produce that. That's a responsibility of his job. The idich, and the man the Amar who holds that loy tells you davka loy, but not a mocher atzmoi. How do you know that it's balkarchay? Imay hasam havamina hanamila midaite. I would have thought, the man the actually I would have thought maybe that's only midas. The Mishnah says means he could work, but who said who said you could force it? Maybe you wouldn't be able to force Eved. Kamash along, you still need the pasuk of loy to tell you that the Odain could force the Eved to be with the Shifrei Tainis. So we referenced earlier in the Gemara, if you don't hold of the Gzer Shavav Schir, how are you going to know that Moicher Atzmoi as an Eved Ivri is Nikna B'Kesev? So the Gemara said, you know it from B'Chisas at Yad Ger Soishov. But we haven't yet been able to identify any specific Tana who rejects the Gzer Shavav Schir. We tried saying that it was the Rabbanan of Rabbi Eliezer, but we just demonstrated that even if the Rabbanan of Rabbi Eliezer are Darshan Schir, there could be special miyutim Lagabi each one of these four halachas to tell us that it doesn't apply by Mocher Atzma. So the Gemara says maybe it's high Tana. Maybe it's another Tana that demonstrates that he rejects the Gzer Shavav Schir. The Tana we learned, V'shov el Mishpacha, says that after Yovel, the Eved goes back to his Mishpacha. This pasuk, I believe this pasuk is in Devarim. Let's see Rashi. I believe this is in Re'eh. It says in the pasuk, V'shov el Mishpachtoi, B'moicher atzmai ksiv, loimer sheyetze b'yovel. So this is in Parshas Vayikra, in Parshas Bahar. In Bahar it says when someone sells himself as an Eved, he goes home by Yovel. So Zog to Gemara. B'meh kosav medab. When the Torah says in the Parsha of Moicher Atzmai, the Shovel Mishpachtoi by Yovel, what is it referring to? Amar B'las Ben Yaakov b'meh kosav medab. Even Moicher Atzmai, if it's the most poshut of pshat, the Torah there is talking about Moicher Atzmai. So maybe when it says the Shovel Mishpachtoi, it's referring to Moicher Atzmai. That doesn't make sense. Harei Kvar Amar, because in the pasuk right before that, it already says that this Eved goes out by Yovel, as Rashi says, the Chsivla Ilminei, Achnas HaYovel Yavad Imach. So the pasuk says right before the pasuk of the Shovel Mishpachtoi, it already tells us that an Eved Ivri who sold himself goes free on Yovel. So that's not what the Shovel Mishpachtoi could be referring to. Ibn Nirtza, and if you want to say it's referring to an Eved Nirtza, again, Harei Kvar Omer, the Torah has another limud to show that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel, and the Gemara is going to get back to this a little bit later to demonstrate where we know that an Eved Nirtza goes free by Yovel. So we have an extra pasuk that's talking about some Eved, telling us that this Eved goes free by Yovel. Which Eved is the Torah referring to with these words, V'shav el Mishpachtoi? We already know Machru Bezdin goes out by Yovel, but what about if Bezdin only sold this fellow 2 or 3 years before Yovel, meaning he didn't have a chance to work even the minimum 6 years that an Eved Ivri normally works for? How do I know that Yovel even releases this Eved who has barely worked 2 or 3 years? We know it from V'shav Mishpachtoi sheYovel Moitziah. Fragt the Gemara, V'sol Kedaitach Yalav Schir. If this Tana holds that you learn Gzer Shava from Schir Schir, Lama Li. Why do I need this pasuk of V'shav el Mishpachtoi to tell you that an Eved that was sold by Bezdin goes free on Yovel, even though he's only working for a couple of years? Neilav Schir. Why can't I learn it from Gzer Shava? The Gzer Shava tells us that whatever applies to an Eved that was Mocher as Atzmoi applies to an Eved that was sold by Bezdin, and vice versa. Elamai, we don't have that limit of Schir, and that's why we needed the extra V'shav el Mishpach. Gewaltig. So now we have in the Makor of a Tana who holds that you don't say the Gzera Shava of Schir. Amar Nachman Yitzchak, no, this Tana could agree to the Gzera Shava of Schir, but it'll have a different problem. L'adam Yalav Schir. The Itzrich, but I still need a special pasuk to tell us that an Eved that didn't work 6 years, only worked a couple of years, he still goes free in Yom. Why do I need a pasuk to tell us that? Someone who sold himself, he didn't do an Avera, he needed extra money, so he sold himself. He'll go free by Yovel no matter what, even if he didn't work a full contract. But an Eved was sold by Bezin, why? Because he was a Ganet. He did an Avera, and that led to his being sold. A manik to say, maybe I would count him and say that you don't get out by Yovel unless you work your full contract. Kamash Rulon, the pasuk of Shaval Mishpachtai, that even this Eved that was sold by Bezdin, who logic would dictate he shouldn't have the benefit of going out by Yovel if he hadn't yet worked his full contract. Kamash Rulon, that even this Eved has the benefit of going out by Yovel. Okay, now in passing, the Brisa told us that we already know that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel. Where do we know that from? Amar Mar Ibn Nirtza Harei Kfar Amar. We already know elsewhere that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel. Mahi, where is the Makar that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel? The Tanya we learned. V'shaftem ish el achuzasoi v'ish el mishpach. This is a pasuk that's in the parsha, not in the parsha of Avodim. It's in the parsha of Yovel. It says in the parsha of Yovel, which let's look up in the Torah or where the parsha of Yovel is in the Torah. It says in Parshas Vayikra Chafei v'kidashtem eshnas achamishim shana v'krosam duror ba'aretz l'chol yishver Yoveli tialachem v'shaftem ishal achuzosoi v'ishal mishpachti tashuv. So the Torah tells us that by Yovel somebody is going free. Ishal mishpachti. Who is this person that the Torah is referring to when the Torah says v'shaftem ishal achuzos? Even moicher atzmoi, if we're speaking about somebody who sells himself as an Eved Ivri, harei kvar omer, we already have a pasuk in Bahar that tells us that an Eved Ivri who sells himself goes out by Yovel. Even machru bezdin, and if we're talking about an Eved who was sold by bezdin, vayter harei kvar omer, we also know that machru bezdin goes out by Yovel. Where do we know that Marchu Bezin goes out by Yovel? Rashi tells us, V'shavel Mishpachtai Tchidokim L'Lohil. Just a moment ago, we said that the pasuk V'shavel Mishpachtai that's in the parsha of Machar Atzmai is extra, and therefore we apply it that an Eved that Bezin sold gets to go out by Yovel even before he worked his 6 years. Ha'ina Kosef Medaber El B'nirtza Shtayim V'shalosh Shanim L'fnei Yovel. The chiddush is that if someone became an Eved Nirtza only 2 or 3 years before Yovel, Shayovel might seem even the Eved Nirtza will go out with Yovel. My mashma, how do you see this on the pasuk? Amar Rava Bar Shila, Amar Kra, Ish. It says Ish. It says the Shaftim Ish alachuzas. Ezeu davar shenoig beish ve'enoig beisha. What component of avdus applies only to an Eved but not to an Amma? We know that an Amma of Riyah cannot become a Nirtza. The whole parsha of Nirtza applies only to an Eved. So V'shaftem Ish al Chuzosai, who is the Torah telling us goes back home by Yovel? Ish, someone who's an Eved, but he can only be a male. Why? Because he's an Eved Nirtza, even he goes free by Yovel. V'itzrich l'michtav machru bezdin, v'itzrich l'michtav Nirtza. We need a special pasuk to tell us that Machru Bezin goes out by Yovel, and we also need a pasuk to tell us that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel, even though the Eved Nirtza is also Machru Bezin. Nevertheless, we need the pasuk to tell us this halacha twice, that each of them go out by Yovel. I wouldn't know one from the other. Yashmi Machru Bezin. If I only knew that a regular Eved that was sold by Bezin goes free by Yovel, Mishum Delei Matay Zmane, because he never wanted to willingly stay as an Eved. His time to leave never arrived. Yovel came, the Torah tells us he goes free. Avol nirtza the mat is manly. But a nirtza who was already entitled to go free because his 6 years already arrived, and he voluntarily wanted to remain a slave, which is an avla, ema niknase. Maybe you should contact him and tell him, oh, you want to be a slave? You'll be a slave forever. You're not even going to go out by Yovel. Hamash Malon, that an Eved Nirtza as well goes out by Yovel. If you ask me a Nirtza, if the Torah only told us that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel, we show him the Ovid Leisheish, because he's already worked 6 years and now he asked for an extension. So the Adin got a lot of nice work out of this fellow, and therefore he goes free by Yovel. Avu Machur Bezdin, the Ovid Leisheish. Machur Bezdin, meaning his 6 years didn't expire, and Yovel hit before. You might think, maybe you don't free him because he didn't even fulfill his work contract to work 6 years yet. Tzricha, that's why you need one pasuk telling you specifically that a nirtza goes free by Yovel, and you need another pasuk specifically to tell you that a nirtza goes free by Yovel. You need the pasuk of V'shaftem to tell you that an Eved Nirtza goes free by Yovel. You also need the pasuk in Mishpatim where it says, and he works forever. What does La'olam mean? La'olam means, of course, it means he just works until Yovel. So again, you have two psukim that seem to indicate that an Eved Nirtza goes out by Yovel. Why do I need both those psukim? Zok to Gemara, the Ikaz Rechman La'olam, if we only had the parsha Mishpatim, which says Vavadi La'olam, Havamina La'olam Mamish. I would have thought La'olam means forever, meaning the Eved does not go free by Yovel. It means he's forever and ever and ever, like an Eved Knaini. Because of Rachman of Shaftim, to tell us that no matter what, even an Eved Nirtza does go free by Yovel. Because of Rachman of Shaftim, but if the Torah only said Shaftim, Havamina, Hanamili Hechid Loyabat Sheikh. When does an Eved Nirtza go free by Yovel? That Eved that didn't work for 6 years yet. But if he already worked for 6 years, the extra work, the extra abdus that he's getting because he was a nirtza shouldn't be any longer than the amount of time that he put in already. And we say just like before he became a nirtza, he only worked for 6 years. Maybe the nirtza just gives you another 6 years. But who said it's until Yovel? Kamash Lon, he'll have to work up until the next year. So we're at a loss because the Gemara said that when the Amru who doesn't darshan the Gzir of Schir, he's the one who needs the Chisas and Yad Ger Toisha to learn from selling yourself to a goy, where we know it works for Kini Kesef, to selling yourself to a Yid. That's how we know that selling yourself to a Yid works with Kini Kesef. But the problem is, we've been trying to find a Tana who doesn't hold of this Gzer Shava, and so far with 2 attempts, we were unsuccessful. Elaman Tana, the Loyal of Schir. Who is the Tana who doesn't darshan Schir? Zatumar Rebbe, it's Rebbe. The Tanya we learned, turning on to Daf Tezvav Amud Beis. Ve'im lo yigal ba'ela. It says in the pasuk by Moicher, by Nimka lo Ovid Kechab. Someone sold himself to a goy. The Torah says that if he wasn't nigal ba'ela, and the pasuk, the pshat there, the pasuk is talking about if he gets redeemed, his family will redeem him. If he wasn't redeemed by anybody, then it says the pasuk says. Then he will stay until, I think, Yovel, let's look at the pasuk inside. So if this person who sold himself to a goy has no one to be paid to him, he'll remain an Eved by the goy until Yovel. So Rabbi Darshans, Ve'ela hu nigal, ve'ein nigal b'sheish. This, that an Eved Ivri goes free after 6 years, that does not apply to a Yid who sold himself to a goy. A Yid who sold himself to a goy does not have the Yitzhi of Sheish. Sheyachol. I would have thought otherwise. V'aloydinu. Let's make a kavachayim. Uma mi she'eni nigel ba'ela, nigel b'sheish, madech, other avodim, who do not have the benefit of being able to be redeemed by family. The pasuk only introduces being redeemed by family, by an Eved Ivri who sold himself to a goy. Every other Eved Ivri, we only know that he could redeem himself if he somehow comes up with the money. But a family member, we don't know that they could redeem him. This is something that the Torah only taught us by someone who sells himself to a goy. So Ma Misha Any Nigel Ba'il, Madech, a regular Eved Ivri, sold to a Yid, who cannot take advantage of being redeemed by a family member. Nigel b'sheish, he does go free after 6 years. This Yid who sold himself to a goy, who has the benefit of an extra release because his family could redeem him. Surely he should also go free after 6 years. Therefore, the Torah says by the Yid who sold himself to a goy, only with the method specified in the parsha can an Eved Ivri who sold himself to a goy go free. The ein nigel b'sheish. An Eved Ivri who sold himself to a goy does not go free after 6 years. V'sol kedaitach yalev schir. If Rebbe holds you have exer shavav schir, Amaika Amar, what does the Raisa even state? We're assuming that other avodim in the Eved Ivri is not nigel through relatives. Why? Because where does the Torah introduce being redeemed by relatives? Dafka by an Eved Ivri who sold himself to a guy. But the Torah doesn't make any mention of being redeemed by relatives when an Eved Ivri is sold by Besin or if he sells himself to a Yid. But I don't understand. Just because the Torah doesn't tell you, if you have the Gzer Shav of schir, then whatever I learned by an Eved Ivri who sells himself to a goy should apply equally to every other Eved Ivri through the Gzer Shava of schir. V'sol kedai the chiyal of schir. Amai ka'amar uma mishe nigel ba'ela. Nelev schir. From schir we should learn that all of them can be redeemed by their family. Now this is a little bit interesting, because the schir that we were talking about on Amud Aleph up until now was schir mentioned by Bezdin selling somebody to, schir mentioned by Bezdin selling somebody, which we know is bekesef, to schir mentioned when someone sells himself, that you can also do that bekesef. Now we're introducing a new schir. We're learning schir that it says by a yid to sell himself to a guy. But I guess the Gemara equates the Gzer Shava to be the same Gzer Shava. You compare all Eved Ivris to each other using the Gzer Shava of schir. And if there is a Gzer of schir, then every other Eved Ivri should also be entitled to being redeemed from a relative. And you see that that's rejected, so it must be Rebbe doesn't hold of schir. Amar Reb Nachman Yitzchak, no, maybe Rebbe does hold of schir. Lo yalav schir. V'shayni hacha the Amar Kra Yigalenu. It says, "V'mdaydai Iben Derdo Yigalenu will redeem him specifically the Eved Ivri that was sold to a guy. So once again, even though you have the general Gzer Shava to compare all the different Eved Ivris together, nevertheless you have a special Gilui Apostle that says Yigalenu. This halacha that you could be nifta from family members, this applies exclusively to an Eved Ivri who sold himself to a guy. So we no longer have any Tana that the Gemara was able to identify that rejects the Gzer Shav of schir. So the Gemara blives like this Lamaskana. The Gemara talked about some Tana somewhere that does not hold of the Gzer Shav of schir, but after 3 attempts, the Gemara was unable to find any Tana that rejects that Gzer Shav. Now the Gemara is just going to go off on a tangent again and delve into this halacha that Rebbe said. Rebbe said, "Ve'elahu nigal, ve'ei nigal b'sheish." Rebbe is the one who said the chiddush that an Eved Ivri that's nimkar to a goy does not go out with sheish. Dr. Gemara umantani the polagalei the Rebbe. Who argues with Rebbe and holds that even an Eved Ivri who sold himself to a goy also goes out with sheish on him? Dr. Gemara Rebbe Yosef, we leave Rebbe Kiva. Both Rabbi Yossi Glili and Rabbi Akiva, although they argue with each other, they both agree that there is the Yitzia of Sheish, even for an Ivridibi who sold himself to a guy. The time we learn, it says, then he'll go out by Yoiv. Rabbi Yossi Glili, Be'ela l'shichr. If he went out with Eila, meaning one of his kroivim was paid to him, then he goes free l'shichr. So when his karv is paid to him, it's not just that it's like his karv bottom. Now he has to work for his karv. When his karv bails him out, he actually walks free and he owes his karv nothing. But but if any other stranger decided to redeem him from his adain, it's not a redemption, it's a purchase. L'shibud, he would have to continue working for that person who redeemed him up until the yovel. That is the shita of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Akiva Eimer punk verkehrt. Be'ela l'shibud. If a relative bails him out, then he doesn't go free. He's just now working for his relative. If a stranger is paid to him, then we say that that's a pigeon, he goes free and he doesn't owe that stranger anything. Dr. Gemara, what is the svara between Rabbi Yossi, between this machloikis of Rabbi Yossi Glili and Rabbi Akiva? My time with Rabbi Yossi Glili. What is the svara of Rabbi Yossi Glili? That if his relative bails him out, he's free. But if a stranger bails him out, then he has to continue working for the stranger. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "Im lo yigo ba'elu." What is the pasuk talking about before? The pasuk is talking about relatives who bail him out, and then the pasuk says, "Im lo yigo ba'elu." If you're not redeemed with Eila, with the method we just discussed, meaning a relative, rather you were redeemed by a third party, then v'yotza b'shnas hayovel. When are you going to go free by yovel? Meaning, even though someone else redeemed you, you're not free. It just means he bought you, and now you're going to work for him. Rabbi Akiva learns differently. It says he learns when it says means if you weren't redeemed only through relatives, then if your relatives redeemed you, then you have to continue working until yovel. You're not free. You're just purchased by your relatives. Correct the Gemara, this makes no sense. Rabbi Yossi Glili can ask Rabbi Akiva, Midi Ela Ba'ela. It doesn't say Ela Ba'ela, it says V'mayigol Ba'ela. So V'mayigol Ba'ela, the most the way to read it is, if you were not nigel with the methods mentioned previously in the pasuk through relatives, then you work until yovel. But if your family redeemed you, you're free. So how could Rabbi Akiva learn the pasuk to mean punk fakeret? Ela B'hai Krokamivim. This, the machloikis, as to whether or not if relatives redeem you, you go free, like Rabbi Yossi Glili. Or if when strangers redeem you, you go free. Like Rabbi Akiva, that's totally in a whole different machlokes. It says in the pasuk, when a yid sells himself to a goy, oy doidoi, oy ben doidoi yigalem. If one of his relatives redeems him, zeh ge'ulas kroivim, that's referring to ge'ula if a relative bailed him out. Then it says in the pasuk, oy siga yadoi, or if he came up with his own money, zeh ge'ulas atzmai. That's someone who redeems himself. Then the pasuk says, "V'nigal zu ge'ulas acherim." That's referring to the redemption from a third party. So, in fact, in this pasuk, which at pasuk chat seems it's only talking about him being redeemed by a family member. In fact, the Torah is alluding to all the three different types of redemptions. Sai if his Ravim redeemed him, Sai if he redeemed himself, and Sai if he was redeemed by strangers. The only important thing to note is the order in which the Torah states them. The first geula is geulas kroivim. The second geula is him being paid to himself, and the third geula mentioned in the pasuk is geulas acher. So, based on this order, Rabbi Yossi Glili Sabar Mikra Nidrash Lefanov. When you darshan backwards. So geulas atzmoi is in the center. Now, geulas atzmoi, there's no doubt he goes free. He was paid himself. So, what are you going to learn from geulas atzmoi? Zok Rabbi Yossi, I'll learn the prior item from geulas atzmoi. Shadi geulas atzmoi, agulas kroivim. Compare the item listed before Gulas Atzmoi, which is Gulas Kroivim, to the item in the middle, to Gulas Atzmoi. Ma Gulas Atzmoi l'shichur. Just like when you're paid to yourself, it's obvious you're going to walk free. Av Gulas Kroivim l'shichur, so too, when your relatives are paid to you, you go free. That was Rabbi Yossi Glili's approach. Rabbi Kiva Savar, Mikra Nidush Akalav. When you're comparing things, you compare something to the thing after. So therefore, Gulas Atma is in the middle. We're not going to compare it to the item before, which is Gulas Kroivov. We're going to say it teaches us about the thing after it, which is Gulas Acher. Shadi Gulas Acher, Ma Gulas Atma. Ma Gulas Atma L'Shicher. Just like when you're put yourself, you go free. Av Gulas Acher L'Shicher. So too, when someone else, a stranger, redeems you, you walk free. That's how Rabbi Kiva learns. So how does the pasuk of V'lo Be'ela fit in? It's a whole different shiloh. It's all a shiloh. Do you learn from Gulas Atzmai to the prior case, like Rabbi Yosy Simon, or do you learn from Gulas Atzmai to the later case, like Rabbi Kiva? Zok Tamar, I still need Be'ela. Know why? Does he love Be'ela? If we didn't have the pasuk of Be'ela, which tells us that at least one case does not go free, one case remains in Eved until Yovel, Havamina Mikra Nidrash Bein Lefonav Bein La'achrav V'Akoilaship. If it wasn't for Be'ela, I would have thought that when you have the case in the middle of Gulas Atmoi, we could learn from it to the case before and the case after, which would say that say if someone was nigal by Krivim, and say if someone was nigal by strangers, regardless he walks free. Be'ela tells you only apply to one. And therefore we have the machlokes. Does it apply to the item before, like Rabbi Yosy Simon, and only if Krivim were pointing you go free? Or does it apply only to the item after, like Rabbi Kiva, where only if a stranger was pointing you to go free? So once again, how do you know how to apply it if you have Be'ela? Be'ela seems to tell you from La Yigal Be'ela, meaning Be'ela with Krivim, which would once again support Rabbi Yosy Simon, not Rabbi Kiva. So tomorrow, at the end of the day, it's Basar Kamifni. Whether or not you should go free if your relatives redeem you, or whether or not you should go free if strangers redeem you, is all totally unlogical. Rabbi Yosy Savar, Mistaver Gulas Acherem L'Shiba. It makes sense that if a stranger is being paid to you, you don't walk free and you don't owe him anything. Rather, if someone is paid to you, you got to work for him. The Amit L'Shicher Havu, if you're going to say you walk free, Mimni V'loy Parkle. Why would someone go and bail out a Yid from working for a guy if I don't get anything out of it? If I can at least acquire an Eved, I'll treat him better. I'll treat him like I'm a Jewish employer. If I get something out of it, then I'll be incentivized to bail him out. Otherwise, I won't. So therefore, Zok Rabbi Kiva, that's the one who should go free. Rabbi Kiva, Zok. So that's the Rabbi Yosy Simon for. That's why if a stranger is paid, you don't go free. Because if you went free, there would be no incentive for a stranger to be paid to somebody who was working for a guy. Rabbi Kiva Savar is exactly the opposite. Mistaver Gulas Krivim L'Shiba. It's better if a relative redeems you, you have to work for him. Why? This is the valve. The Amit L'Shicher, if you're going to say that when a relative redeems you, you walk free, people will take advantage. They'll say, I'll keep on selling myself, I'll make good money, and then my relatives are going to feel guilty and they're going to be paid to me anyway. But if when my relatives are paid to me, I'm going to have to work for them, I become their slaves, then I'm not going to be so excited to sell myself anymore. But a stranger won't feel a chiyuv, won't feel pressured to be paid to me. Therefore, if a stranger is paid to me, I do go to shikhr. Okay, we'll stop here. Be'ez Hashem will be mamshich tomorrow. Shkoyach.